Hello, everybody.
Turn this up in my headphones, Charles. This is my jam.
That's my jam. Going up. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special emergency episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast, Dylan.
That's me. Yeah. Can you run that theme song back one more time there, Charles?
Only because it's an emergency episode and we have no other option. Here we go. Emergency episode.
Yeah. All right. Well, I do actually really want to get into this because this is high priority, Charles. No time to fool around.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I cut it out. So, Dylan, can you just take over this for me and explain to everyone why we're here? Because you were the one that called this gathering.
Yeah. Well, I had to call the council, which is just me and Charles on the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast.
And all you friends out there, respect.
Yeah. Respect out to the friends. Or friends of friends, as we like to call our fan base.
That's true.
So we're doing this because while we've been reading some Lord of the Rings right now in current recording time, I don't know when we're dropping this episode.
It'll be much later, I think.
I just couldn't help myself. I picked up The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, and I couldn't believe how much I loved it. It's so good.
Wow.
I was just so enraptured by this book that I don't know. I fired out a tweet.
Yeah, I saw the tweet. I was like, that's news to me. Like, Dylan's gone rogue reading all these really good fantasy books.
Yeah. Well, Lord of the Rings is very classic fantasy, and at heart, I'm more of a modern fantasy, especially grimdark guy, and this book, The Poppy War, very much hits those notes. So I was trying to get a bit of that, and I just didn't know I would love it so much. And I don't know, Charles. I feel like we have to find a way to cover this. And
right. So I purposely have not even Googled Poppy War, so I know absolutely nothing about it because I wanted you to explain it to me. When I saw that tweet drop, I was like, okay, Dylan's got some explaining to do. And we've been talking about doing these kind of mini episodes, these recommendation episodes, and we figured this would be a good place to kind of start experimenting with that by having this emergency gathering. So, Dylan, why don't you explain Poppy War to all those people out there that haven't heard of it, like me?
Sure, Charles. Yeah. Well, The Poppy War is a story that draws inspiration from 20th century China, especially by the Second Sino-Japanese War. It mainly follows the journey of our protagonist, Rin, who is a war orphan from a war that took place before this book starts, who begins the novel in a house raised by cruel foster parents that want to marry her off to a much older man. And Rin wants no part of that, so she studies intensely for an exam that if she does really well on it, she has a chance to get into a place called Sinigard, which is an extremely prestigious military academy that people from Rin's impoverished background are rarely ever admitted to. And stories in part a school story, and it's also in part a war story, unsurprisingly, based on the title, The Poppy War.
Right.
And so Rin's of an age where it could, on the surface level, be mistaken for a coming-of-age YA type tale, but the content is actually really grimdark and violent, so I would not recommend it for people who are looking for that. Actually, Rebecca Kuang, the author, put it, I can't curse on here, but she used the actual word that I won't use because we're trying to maintain our non-explicit rating
We're
here.
family friendly here.
We're family friendly, and the author put if you liked Avatar: The Last Airbender, but always wished it were a little darker and more effed up, you might like this.
Okay.
I have a feeling there's a lot of people out there who feel that way.
All right. I mean, yeah, I really enjoyed The Last Airbender. When it dropped on Netflix, I watched it. I rewatched it, and I thought it was quite good. I would be very interested in a more mature one, because for me, I love Avatar, but it's also very clearly like a kids movie, like a show that was written for kids originally. It holds up for adults, but the idea of entering more mature themes and realms sounds very appealing. It's a great desk pitch, elevator pitch.
Yeah. So to give some background on the author, she graduated with a degree in Chinese history from Georgetown University, according to Wikipedia, a few days after its release. I believe she was in her early 20s when she was writing this.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she's a pretty impressive person from what I can gather. She's getting her PhD in, I don't want to mess that up because I don't have that in front of me, but I know she's getting her PhD right now in a related field. And her knowledge very much shows when she's putting us in this setting, which is different from a lot of your typical medieval fantasy a la European equivalent setting. So that's exciting for a change of pace.
All right. So why do we have to... Because you're suggesting that we take our carefully planned Friends Pitching Fantasy schedule that goes through December, and your suggestion is that this book is so good that we have to kind of disrupt our schedule, push back Book of the Ancestor so that we can insert Poppy War into the reading schedule. You want to explain that to the fans and to me?
The fans who expect us to rigidly hold to our Friends Pitching Fantasy, which I'm saying let's still read all of those books. We've got The Burning God, which is the third and final book in this trilogy, coming out November 17th, and I just want to be able to be reading it while that's coming out and while people are talking
you
about
want it
that
to be a timely release so that we can read the third book right when it comes out and discuss it on a buddy read episode within 2 weeks from the drop date. That's pretty fair.
And I wouldn't care about all that if I wasn't so obsessed with this book now. And I've only read the first one so far. So for me, the number one thing in any fantasy novel is about characters. And when it comes to characters in the Poppy War, that conversation has to focus on Rin, the protagonist. I mean, the story does such a good job of putting you in Rin's headspace, her perspective, that even though it's third-person narrative, I legitimately felt like it had all the benefits that first-person narrative gets you while still holding on to the good things about third-person. So, I mean, you're right there in her head. You're dealing with all these things that she's dealing with. And I think what I really, really like about Rin is the way that Kuang presents Rin. She does this incredible job of balancing act of presenting Rin as someone with that tenacity and ruthlessness of almost, if Charles, I know you've read the Broken Empire trilogy,
right? Talking about Jorg,
by Mark Lawrence, and Jorg. We talked about he got mentioned in our favorite protagonists episode, but neither of us listed him as favorite protagonist because we felt like we really like this. Like, he's relentless. He will do whatever it takes to get what he wants.
Very matter of fact, very decisive, very proactive.
For sure. And Rin has that kind of relentlessness or tenacity. But it's balanced with this vulnerability in a way that, like, Jorg does not seem to have, and it makes her feel so real. So that that Jorg piece we love grabs all of that for Rin, but not completely lacking in empathy in the way Jorg often comes across. And I feel like what we get here is someone who will move the plot forward and do all these things that you kind of wish a lot of characters that can be more passive would just go ahead and do. And she also has that willingness to be ruthless when she needs to. I feel like it hits even harder than it does in some of these other books with just like really straightforward, almost anti-hero, bad protagonists. Not bad as in not well written, but bad as in bad
actions.
Guy.
Yeah.
She doesn't come off evil or anything like that, which makes it feel it hits even harder when you see her make these almost Machiavellian and justifies the means decisions. She's just willing to sacrifice whatever it takes to get what she wants. But you also get to see her grapple with the idea that she's feels like a real person who is making these decisions. So some of that moral stuff, I think, is even more poignant with her.
Wow. So, I mean, you're selling me on it. I keep going back to this like Avatar thing. Is it really like Avatar, and in what ways is it like Avatar?
I think that it's like Avatar in the magic system has some elements of that. I don't want to give anything away because the magic system has a little bit of a slow roll, but it is a fantasy novel, so there is magic. And yeah, so there's some things about the magic system that definitely have Avatar type feelings to it. I think also the setting. I mean, Avatar obviously inspired by Asian settings and more.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's ever actually explicit, but it does even have like an anime kind of feel to the art style and everything.
Yeah. So I think that's where a lot of that happens, and maybe it's character focused in the way that Avatar is, but I'd say it's a lot of that she's drawing on when she's making that comparison. I know she was inspired by Avatar in some ways, or at least I think she frames it a little more like implicitly she was probably inspired by it because she really likes Avatar: The Last Airbender. But that's what I'm gathering there.
Okay, well, I mean, I do like the idea of releasing an episode more around the timely release of a book. And, you know, you pitched a lot of books to me lately through the Friends Pitching Fantasy segment, but I think this one just came so charged. It's like it's like we have to read this kind of a thing, where it was like you really felt that inspiration for this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the characters are first and foremost there. I think there's other great characters. I know I stressed a lot on Rin there.
Yeah.
I think some of the other ones, especially there's a character named Alton that's, I think, so well written. Like, Kuang presents these characters kind of one light at first, and you think you start to get a feel for what their deal is, and then she lets these nuances come out when it feels appropriate, and she does this job of almost like totally warping your perception of a character without it feeling like some sort of out of nowhere subversion. It feels like, oh, I see why that side of this person exists. And yeah, all of that I think shows so much skill and willingness to make characters complex and kind of let the readers figure out for themselves what to think about the characters, because all of them have this capability for good and evil in them. I think the dialogue that they present too is just super modern feeling and fresh in that sense, especially at least for me. We're reading The Lord of the Rings, which is on the other end of that spectrum, and then these characters are in this book, The Poppy War, talking like how people talk now more so, and it's pretty fun reading that. Other than the characters, though, the pacing, Charles, is incredible. I mean, good. I think you'd appreciate it a lot
because they're not like epically big. They're not like The Name of the Wind or something like that, or The Wise Man's Fear.
In their length,
they're not tomes.
More like, yeah, the first one, The Poppy War, is 500 some odd pages, and I'll say it covers an amount of story that feels more typical of the amount you'd expect to get done in a trilogy.
Wow.
But it never feels rushed in its pacing.
Right.
Which is
and every step
incredible.
is earned in the progression
Yes.
of it. Yeah. That's not an easy thing to do.
Somehow she just finds this way to give us each scene that we need and just about nothing else. And I think the only I was trying to think before this if there's like what would be my issues with this book, and you know, we're not critics, we're enthusiasts over here. So I'm like, I don't feel pressured to have to find anything, and I really couldn't. And I think maybe if you are someone who is used to things moving more at the pace that things usually move in fantasy novels, then you might feel like it goes too fast.
It's a weird complaint.
No, it's like, yeah, it'd be a weird complaint.
There's too much happening in this book.
Because the thing is, it moves fast, but at no point does it.
I mean, is it like demanding on the reader, like Malazan can be, where it's like?
No. It's way more focused. It's super focused. It's Rin's story more than anything, and it tells a very complete story that takes us through so much more than I think most series, because it finds a way to get you the important bits of this like school story part while also being willing to delve into the war aspects, and it feels like it would not be unusual at all for other series to really take time. Okay, now we're at the school. I'll do the school for 1 book, 2 books, whatever. This series, or I'll say this book because I haven't read the rest of it yet, it gives us what we need out of every piece of it and moves us along, and I really appreciate that.
That's awesome. I, especially after reading Lord of the Rings, I would appreciate that too, of like a lot happening, fast clip, modern language, seems refreshing. And speaking of me, let's talk more about me. Like,
let's talk about you, Charles.
Like, what about me specifically makes me need to stop and read this right away? You know?
Nothing about you, Charles. It's about me. Okay. No, it's about everyone. So I think, Charles, you do appreciate a lot of you said in, I can't remember what episode. Oh yeah, one of our Lord of the Rings episodes, I asked you, hey, do we need more stuff that kind of
that was our Two Towers episode. Yep.
And, yeah, and you were like, I don't know, I always lean toward let's just give us what we need and let's go and get through it without rushing.
Sure.
And I think that you'll appreciate that pacing. I think if you liked Jorg, which you did like those things about Jorg, yeah. I think you'll like Rin even more, because I do like Rin more than I like Jorg, and I think that Mark Lawrence's best protagonist, in my opinion, is Nona anyway, as I mentioned in our protagonist episode. Yeah, I think you appreciate a character that's a protagonist that's proactive and just willing to take the steps that need to get done. And Rin, from page 1, basically just establishes that that's what she's awesome. Like she does not want to get married to this older dude and live her life like that. So she's like, okay, like, I will do whatever it takes to make that not happen. So she does. And she carries that through. And it's so awesome. So I think you'd appreciate that. There's some really cool stuff explored about in the themes, like ambition and the costs of ambition, what you can get done with ambition and whether or not that's worth it.
Interesting.
It hits on these. I don't know if there's another book that hits on these brutality of war ideas as well either as the Poppy War does. I'm trying to think what could possibly compete with this, and it's not coming to mind. I think that some of the
of war, like Game of Thrones, kind of,
yeah. I mean, Game of Thrones feels like one of the first that I
You
know
kind
of
of
anyway
expect
to really
it to be violent all the time. Really, it's like it's a
yeah.
violent world, you know.
Yeah. I think that Game of Thrones did an awesome job of taking some of these things that were well established in fantasy, like these giant wars happen, and showing, hey, there actually is a human cost to this.
Yeah.
I think I think the Poppy War hits that even harder per page anyway. I'll say that. It's maybe not over the whole course of everything that's out there in A Song of Ice and Fire. I can't speak for how people react, but Poppy War, I don't know. There's something about being so locked into Rin's perspective and going through everything with
Okay.
her and getting some of these experiences of
Sure.
the school setting, which feel pretty normal in fantasy, and then
Right.
going from that toward the war setting, that makes it even more jarring.
Very true. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that, and then there's some really great stuff explored about oppression. There with Rin comes from this impoverished background. She's got dark skin, which is not there's something that you face a lot of discrimination for in the society that Kuang presents. Sure. And that and gender discrimination and the ways that she grapples with these things and also uses that tenacity to deal with them are really cool to see.
That's, so I like your energy here, and I think I'm excited to read the books. I think that, look, we had planned to read Witcher and Book of the Ancestor, and now you've discovered Poppy War, and I think it's important that when inspiration strikes, you just gotta ride that wave, follow that energy. And it's good to have the release of book 3 as kind of like the focal point of our release schedule. And I don't see any reason why we can't make it work, why we can't have Witcher and then go into Poppy War, and then we just have to push back Book of the Ancestor a few weeks, and then we can have it all.
Wow, Charles.
We have time. I mean, we are recording super far in advance, which has been to our detriment for so long, but I think we can throw some stuff around on the schedule, and we can go from having like a lot of safety episodes to having like no safety episodes but more books out, which I think everyone will appreciate that.
Are you saying what I think you're saying there, Charles?
I'm saying, look, if we can ride the wave as long as you don't keep going on reading ahead without me.
I might even just reread the Poppy War when we do that episode.
We will have the time. We should have the time for it. I'm going to give myself time to read it. I usually give myself 2 weeks per book. That's how I like to.
Nah, this is awesome. I'm super excited because, I mean...
Well, look, you don't just call an emergency episode every day. This is unprecedented friends talking fantasy history here. So to call this council in these times is significant on its own, let alone this 20-minute pitch you've now given me and this tweet you blasted publicly under the FTF banner. So it's like... You
like that, Charles? I put something out there.
You didn't even tell me. I found it on my notifications of like people liking a tweet. I was like, "What happened?" And then it was like, "Oh, reading this series is really good." I'm like, news to me.
We have to cover it on the show. Wink, wink, nod, nod.
So
Dylan said without consulting his co-host. This could have been it. I mean, I would have, if not us actually doing a buddy read of it, I at least just wanted to talk about it and throw as much support
for sure.
as I could.
And I think we're in a position now, we're so far ahead that we can read that and catch up and be a week ahead by the time the third book comes out, and we can be super current in a super timely position. And I'll have read the series that you highly recommend. I mean, the last time you came at me with this kind of energy was King Killer, and I really enjoyed reading King Killer, so I would be crazy not to read it. And I don't want to like wait several months like after just like into January to read it when the energy is here and now, you know? So it's like,
Yeah.
let's make it work.
Well, you're preaching to the choir over here. Let's do it. Let's read the Poppy War.
And so it was decided. We're going to fit Poppy War into the schedule. How, when, where, we will figure it out. We'll be sure to announce it super early so that anyone has time to read Poppy War if they want to catch up on the buddy read. So be sure to check out the Friends Talking Fantasy website. Check out our reading schedule. Check out our social media. We'll announce the dates and stuff as we make changes to our existing script. So
awesome!
Yeah,
I did it.
Should we do
this
it?
This is unprecedented. There's we've never
unprecedented. This is out of control. This Poppy War business better live up to my expectations now.
You're gonna love it.
I'm very excited. I know it's gonna be good. These recommendations don't come lightly, I would say. I mean, we like a lot of books, and you always come to me saying you read stuff and it was really good. But I could tell from what's been happening this last week that this was something that I wouldn't want to miss out on. I felt kind of bummed. I was like, man, you read this without me. How are we ever going to get it into the schedule? But I think we can make it work.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I didn't know I'd get this into it because I read other stuff while we're doing this, and I'll say, oh yeah, this one was good, okay, like that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I can't remember the last time I was reading a novel by a new author that I got this excited about. Like new author in terms of I haven't read this author yet. That I got this excited about. Like, I mean. This is next level amount of entertaining for me.
Well, now
this
you
book.
got me
it's
excited.
So
I think I've known you long enough that I know when like this kind of energy is something I got to check it out. You know, this word of mouth here, it's working.
My mouth, my words.
That's
your
right.
ears, Charles.
That's right. And that's all it is. All right. Well, is there anything else you need to say about Poppy War before we go ahead and call it a day?
Listeners, if you trust me, don't make the mistake I did and continue to wait on this series. Go and read it. It's time.
Wow.
If you're already had, you're smarter than I am.
Yeah, and take a look at our reading schedule if you want to read it along with me anyway, and probably with Dylan a second time around. And
yep.
Let's go, fam. Let's read these books. Let's have that discourse. Let's revel in the wonder that is the Poppy Wars.
Let's revel.
I mean, I don't want to go into it with any bias, but I'm feeling good about it.
Yeah. Well, go in ready for
if I start reading it and hating it, I'm gonna be like, oh god, this is gonna be old. Dylan's gonna come at me.
Oh yeah, it's not gonna be a safe place for you to not like the book, Charles. I do my best, but I don't know. I don't know how. I was legit trying to think because I'm always of the attitude of like, there are things that it totally makes sense to just subjectively not like, even if I really like a book. I'm sure those things are out there about this, but I just enjoyed it so much I was having trouble thinking of any caveats of why people wouldn't like the book.
Well,
I mean, I'm sure you can go.
The hype
to
is
Goodreads
there and has been
stuff.
established, man. The energy is powerful. And this is our emergency meeting. Thank you all for attending the emergency council. And the council has decided we will.
Rules in favor of me.
It was in favor of Dylan's will. Dylan's will tends to come into action here on the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. I watched 3 episodes of Curse for no reason.
Yeah,
But I think this time it'll work in both of our favors, which is always always a nice thing to happen. Anything else before we get that sweet outro music going?
Get that sweet outro music going, Charles.
Get that sweet outro music going. Thank you, everyone, for attending the emergency meeting of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. This has been your host, Charles, along with the ever-persistent Dylan.
Ever persistent indeed. I'm inspired by Rin's persistence, so I thought I'd come in with that same level.
Well,
of
I've
relentlessness.
never heard of Rin, but I can see the inspiration that she's put upon you. So we will get excited, get hyped. If you want to add into this excitement, feel free to reach out to us at Friends Talking Fantasy. Let's see. Places everywhere, just Google Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast, but also we are the FTF Podcast at gmail.com. Send us a message. Find us at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and the FTF Podcast #1 on Twitter.
Yep, the FTFpodcast.com too.
Yep, and rate us 5 stars. It makes a difference, you know. So thank you all for listening, and we appreciate you being here. And as always, friends, go forth and conquer, friends.